Dr. Wells here with my research assistant, Coco. Hi, Coco. I'm sitting by the fireplace because today we're going to talk about inflammatory diets. Yeah, I know it's a kind of a catch-all term that we hear a lot within the nutrition and holistic world, but there is some evidence to show that diets can promote inflammation. We talk a little bit about this. Actually, we have an entire section on inflammatory states in our board-approved continuing education courses. But this study that I have today for our research update is by Castro et al., and it's published in Biogerontology, and it's a systematic review. So they went out and looked up a bunch of studies that focused on does an inflammatory diet actually affect aging? So in a way, there's been some suggested sort of evidence that diets can impact our telomere length, which is kind of an indirect measurement of aging. If you recall, telomeres help to pull apart the DNA, right, during the transition from Anaphase, from mesophase to Anaphase during cell division, right? And so as those shrink, you get more likelihood of mutations and genetic disruption. So that being said, they wanted to see what does the research show. They found 9 good studies. They were looking at obviously trying to find robust studies, not case studies. So they found 7 crossover studies, or excuse me, 7 crossover studies, 2 longitudinal studies, and what they found were a variety of metrics. One was that several studies use food frequency questionnaires, which is very common within the research sort of studies, while some use 24-hour recall. We talk about this in our courses, like what's the difference, what's the pros, what's the cons. But long story short, they found of those 9 studies, 4 of them saw a link with pro-inflammatory diets using the Diet Inflammatory Index, which is kind of like the Alternative Healthy Index in a way, but it's basically scores food on how pro-inflammatory it is, and that can be due to multiple factors, whether it has high amounts of saturated fat, whether it has high amounts of salts, whether it's ultra-processed, whether overall like dietary patterns show that it can be pro-inflammatory either on C-reactive proteins or other metrics. So in essence, the systematic review shows there is some link with a pro-inflammatory diet with shortening telomeres. However, there's in 4 of the 9 studies. Also, the studies are using different methods, right? One's using food frequency questionnaire, the other one's using 24-hour recall. And so it's a major issue when you look at the overall ability to extrapolate this. So my opinion is that this is just the beginning, and what we need to see is more robust longitudinal studies looking at using consistent methods of measuring inflammatory diets as well as telomere length. And that is another issue too, is that there's variability with measuring telomere lengths, and there's some issues with probably how one study measured it versus another. So what we need to see is more consistency across both of those measures before we come to a conclusion. Regardless, about half the studies showed that there's a link. I think I see a link with individuals and their dietary patterns with aging, but I would say maybe I see it more strongly with chronic diseases, so I can more definitively tell my patients, listen, you're not going to live hundreds of years longer eating an anti-inflammatory diet. However, I will say that you will be less likely to develop things like diabetes, inflammatory tendinopathies, osteoarthritis that's actually symptomatic. So anyhow, I hope you like this. My friend Coco has now left me. She's finding something more interesting because I'm probably talking too much. Anyhow, thanks for tuning in. Check out more on our website at www.nutritionalphysicaltherapy.com. We got some great courses and information for physical therapists and rehab professionals. Have a good one.